it's not a weird topic anymore. In fact, I would argue that, you're kind of weird if you're not thinking about it. Especially if you have a family.
Yeah.
The cycles of disaster these days are absolutely crazy, and the instability in our world, not only from a weather perspective, but from an economic and political perspective, are just mind-boggling. And if you're not thinking about this subject, you should be. But in terms of in the midst of a crisis, there are two thoughts I have. Number one is taking some of these preparedness steps in advance in times of peace can do so much for you mentally when a time of crisis happens. It can help to reduce fear and anxiety, having a plan already in place rather than trying to make these decisions in the midst of an unexpected and sudden disaster scenario is so much better on the human psyche, especially for children, than the alternative.
Welcome to CREPN Radio for influential commercial real estate professionals who work with investors, buyers, and sellers of commercial real estate coast to coast. Whether you're an investor, broker, lender, property manager, attorney, or accountant, we're here to learn from the experts.
Welcome to Commercial Real Estate Pro Network's CREPN Radio. Thanks for joining us. My name is Jay Darren Gross. This is a podcast focused on commercial real estate investment and risk management strategies. Weekly, we have conversations with commercial real estate investors and professionals who provide their experience and insight to help you grow your real estate portfolio. Today's interview is sponsored by Building Insurance and Risk. When you invest in real estate, it pays to work with a real estate investor protection specialist to protect yourself and your investment from catastrophic loss. The experts at Building Insurance and Risk focus on real estate investor protection. They provide you with multiple insurance coverage offers and a side-by-side coverage comparison. To learn more, go to buildinginsurancerisk.com. Today, my guest is Creek Stewart. Creek is an expert survival instructor and author of Survival Hacks and the best-selling Build the Perfect Bug Out series. Has been featured on the Weather Channel, the Today Show, Fox and Friends are just a couple places where Creek has been featured. And in just a minute, we're going to speak with Creek about, get down to this, mastering the art of preparedness. But first, a quick reminder, if you like our show, CREPN Radio, there are a couple things you can do to help us out. You can like, share, and subscribe. And as always, we encourage you to leave a comment. We love to hear from our listeners. Also, if you want to see how handsome our guests are, be sure to check out our YouTube channel. You can find us on YouTube at Commercial Real Estate Pro Network. And while you're there, please subscribe. With that, I want to welcome my guest, Creek Stewart. Welcome to CREPN Radio.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me. I've been looking forward to this opportunity.
Well, I'm delighted to have you, and I'm looking forward to it myself. But before we get started, if you could take just a minute and share with the listeners a little bit about your background.
Yeah, so I'm a survival instructor by trade. I taught my first survival course 25 years ago. I grew up in Boy Scouts, though, and I think that's where I found my love for the outdoors. But my career in survival has also included disaster preparedness, whether it's natural disaster or man-made disaster. And so I spend a lot of my time in the woods, but also helping people think about and prepare for natural disaster, which is really, I think, the focus of our conversation today.
Yeah, no, definitely the disasters are upon us. It seems like daily the weather strikes there, and environmental issues, fires and earthquakes, hurricanes, floods.
Right.
I know as an insurance broker, I'm constantly trying to explain to clients and anybody that's interested or asking just kind of some of the challenges the insurance market's facing based on all of these. Because I don't know, there are people that will kind of poo-poo the global warming, but I think that what I've seen, and I think the insurance companies would agree or argue it's happening. It's just it is the as the atmosphere warms, it allows for storms to be larger and perhaps more frequent. And I think that's one of the reasons, whether it be a drying a hot air mass that dries out everything and makes it tinder, or winds that blow, or
Yeah.
big wet storms, lots of flooding, or big
Yeah.
snowstorms, even like what was a couple of years ago, California was talking about it take 17 years or 30 years to get out of their drought,
Yeah.
and they did it in 1 year, kind of thing. So
Weather across the board seems to be changing. I don't think anyone would argue that. The cause of which, I think people argue about a lot, but weather is certainly changing, and
yeah,
I always say the next disaster is next week.
yeah, or later today, just watch the
Right.
be
Right.
prepared
Right.
there.
Right.
So. Well, and I'm delighted to hear your Boy Scout background. I was a scout myself, had tons of fun, always enjoyed the campouts.
Yeah.
Uh, Not always some of the food that we ate on the campouts, but the just the tents and the gear and the
Yeah.
fires and the you know having a pocket knife and whittling on something, and the hikes, and it was always just a great ton of fun there. So.
The good old days, right? So I have to ask, did you make Eagle?
I didn't. I was
You
bummed.
didn't.
I did not. I got to I was a service project away from life, and I think
Okay.
what the challenge with that whole schedule of things is that if you're not on it before you
Yeah.
get to 16, uh,
Yeah.
there's a whole new level of life opportunities that presented themselves,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I kick myself because I've got friends that did it, and I think in many cases they had some parental push that I didn't have, that
Yeah.
was really kind of kicking their butt to make sure they did it. But nonetheless, just all of the structure of Scouts was kind of fundamentally cool from the standpoint of an experimental opportunity for if you wanted to head a project, be a leader on something, or plan
Yeah.
something, or organize something, and then kind of the opportunity to plan for something and then kind of deconstruct it afterwards. What went
Yeah.
right, what went wrong, and just that. And there was a great group of guys that I remember being a part of it, and so a lot of fond memories in that. Um, and so it's funny because I haven't really thought about that for a long time, but well, that used to be a big thing back in the day, and
Yeah.
the Scouts have kind of fallen on hard times
Yeah. Yeah. They
as of
have.
late, which is kind of sad. But
Yeah.
but so take us back here. So you were in the Scouts, and you've been doing this for, did you say 25 years? You've been teaching the
25 years. I taught my first wilderness survival course, which was essentially the wilderness survival merit badge from scouting.
okay.
While I was in college, I actually went to college to be a pharmacist until I shadowed one and panicked. And I taught my first wilderness survival class that same year, and that's when I started my business. And I essentially taught the wilderness survival merit badge for years before I started expanding into other skill sets. And it took a long time for me to figure out how to grow my business. It's a very odd career choice. My parents, I think, panicked when I switched from pharmacy to business with the intent of becoming a wilderness survival instructor. I just loved scouting so much, and I love the wilderness so much. I think my plan was just, how can I just spend all of my time in the woods and make money? And it took 15 years to figure that out. But boy, has this been an awesome career. Not only rewarding for myself, but now I get to teach. I get to teach people things and skills that actually matter. And I get stories all the time. I've written over 40 books that have to do with wilderness survival and disaster preparedness. I've hosted 3 television shows, and so I'm in a unique position to get a lot of feedback on the skills and things that I teach. And people share stories with me all the time about how Whether it's a wilderness survival skill or whether it's something from disaster preparedness about evacuation that has helped them in their life, and made a big difference. So I've, even though I didn't make a lot of money in the beginning, I've carved a niche out for myself in this business, and it's been really rewarding, and I really enjoy it.
Cool. So from the beginnings, or I guess I'm trying to think of a way to introduce this, because disasters are not limited to you know, natural cause or, you know, weather
Right.
related kind of things. But there's some fundamental common, or I'm assuming there's some fundamental kind of common
Yeah.
survival skills across the board. Um, what how is it that you view it when you're talking with your clients or others about you know, a starting point?
Yeah. That's a really great question. So there's a ton of overlap between wilderness survival and disaster preparedness because at the end of the day, us as human beings, we have the same survival needs regardless of the situation. And they essentially come down to shelter, water, fire, and food in that order. Um, Created loosely on what we call the three survival rules of three. In extreme conditions, you can live for 3 hours without shelter, 3 days without water, and 3 weeks without food. And so, whether it's wilderness survival or whether it's disaster preparedness, those are the four main categories that we start with. And when we begin to talk about disaster survival, I always love to start with what's called a bug out bag, which is a 72-hour disaster preparedness kit, just in case you had to leave your home in the event of a disaster evacuation. Okay. And the one thing that I really love about packing a bug out bag and learning about all of those different categories is you get to tip your toes in a lot of different survival categories because inside of that bug out bag, that evacuation kit, you have all of the things you need to survive for 3 days independently, for independent survival for 72 hours. You have the shelter, the water, the fire, the food, the tools, the medicines, the first aid, the hygiene, all of those things packed into one kit. So you get to dabble in all of those little things on a micro scale, much less expensive, and begin to learn about all of the different concepts that you may eventually begin to incorporate into your home for a shelter in place scenario. So, for someone just starting out, if they're listening and they're just starting out with disaster survival, I always say start with a bug out bag.
So in that you'd kind of listed some of the things, you know, shelter, I'm assuming there's some sort of like a tent or a tarp or something like that, that you, you know, the elements of your bug out bag.
Exactly. So shelter encompasses several different categories, really. So number one is a tent. I prefer the enclosed space of a tent versus a tarp. I like the tarp camp when I'm just out having a good time in perfect weather, but rarely is there perfect weather in a disaster scenario. So I love the enclosed vestibule of a tent. It provides privacy if you're evacuating and there's a lot of other people in the area as well. But another big component within the shelter category is your sleep system. So, season appropriate sleeping gear, a sleeping pad, and things like that. So, um, the biggest components of a bug out bag are definitely your shelter materials. They are definitely the most bulky and oftentimes weigh the most as well.
Yeah. No, I've learned the pad is pretty dang important, as
Critical.
opposed to sleeping on the ground. I mean,
Yeah.
you think about I don't know how far back you want to go, but I mean, I always have this romantic vision of the cowboys sleeping on the range, and I can't
Yeah.
imagine there's a lot of good rest on the ground there.
Yeah.
But so all right, so the bug out bag, we've got the shelter and the sleep.
Yeah.
You mentioned meds. I would think that'd be a primary thing. If anybody's got any kind of specific meds that they need to make sure you've got a couple days supply of that.
That's right. Whether it's in a bug out bag or whether you're preparing at home, prescription medicines are a big deal these days. You know, a high percentage of the population, especially in America, depend on medicine for chronic illness. You know, our society is riddled with chronic illness and disease. And if you are dependent on prescription medicines or insulin or something like that, then those definitely need to be considered when preparing for disaster, whether it's in an evacuation kit or whether it's in your home emergency kit. Having a conversation with your family doctor about getting an extra prescription so that you can set up a system of rotation and have a 30-day supply of extra meds on hand is a really, really smart idea, just in case you wouldn't be able to get to the pharmacy, or things would be shut down, or you'd be evacuated to a remote area. Who knows? There's all kinds of scenarios that could happen that could interrupt your pharmaceutical supply.
Got it. Um, so shelter, meds, water, was it 3 days without water?
Yes, in extreme conditions. So water is really important, far more important than food, which is what people typically think about first. But there's two, so let's talk about water in a bug out bag, and then let's talk about water at home, because some people are thinking, I'm going to shelter in place at home. What do I do for water at home? And some people might be thinking about a bug out bag. So in a bug out bag, we keep it pretty simple. We have a 1 liter metal canteen filled with fresh drinking water at all times, so that you've got at least 1 liter of drinking water when you head out the door. It's a metal canteen, so you can boil the water on the go and purify more water. But you also need a water filter in your bug out bag. I always recommend this. It's called the Sawyer Mini. It's a little straw style squeeze filter that allows you to scoop water up from a puddle or a pond or a creek and filter that water to make it safe to drink. And so with those 3 items in your bug out bag, you not only have immediate water, but you have a filter to filter renewable water, and also a metal canteen to boil water in the event that you lost your filter or it was compromised. But when it comes to home, water's huge. It doesn't take, there's disasters that happen all the time that pollute the municipal water supply in some way, shape, or form, or break the lines and disconnect the water supply. So you definitely want to think about water when it comes to sheltering in place. You want to have 1 gallon of water on hand per person per day. Water is bulky and it's really heavy, so you can't store most people at least can't store months of water. So I always recommend 2 weeks of freshwater storage, 1 gallon per person per day. And that can be in bottled water. It can be in 5-gallon jugs, in 1-gallon jugs, strategically placed throughout the house or the basement or the garage. And it can even be in big containers like 55-gallon food grade drums, which is a really popular storage method for people who are really into preparedness. So you want to have freshwater storage. And then, like in a bug out bag, you want to have a filter. So a non-electric filter that is gravity fed. The one I always use is called Pro One. There's a container at top. You pour the water in the top. It filters down through a charcoal or a ceramic filter into the bottom where it becomes safe to drink. Okay, so you want to have a gravity fed filter. And then lastly, you want to establish a renewable source of water for when that 2-week supply goes dry. For most people in North America, the solution for that is a rain barrel. Other than some very dry and arid parts of the country, most people are going to be able to supply all of their water needs if they have just 1 or 2 rain barrels hooked up to the downspouts of their house. And if you have those 3 things in place, you are like 85% good to go in the water department, which is absolutely critical.
Yeah. No, I think water. Yeah, it's funny you mentioned just how we take all that for granted. You go to the tap and turn it on, and you got water, but it's not uncommon to have some sort of an interruption. Whether somebody's, I know even around here, it's like if somebody's digging or something like that, and they hit a line
Yeah.
or whatever, the main gets compromised or whatever, and there's kind of a period of time where you've got to flush the system to get the sediment out or whatever that is. Um,
Yeah.
so you got the shelter, you got the water, meds we talked about. Cash, is that any, is that one of your primary?
Cash. Absolutely. So that would be in what we would call the documents category. So
Yeah.
important documents that you want to have at the ready to either evacuate with you out of the house to make putting life back together after the event a lot more easy. Um, but one of those would be cash for sure. I can't tell you how many stories I've heard in natural disaster evacuations, especially like hurricanes during Katrina and Helene, where ATMs were down, electric was down, and hotels literally, or wherever, gas stations, restaurants in route during evacuation, these places were not accepting anything except cash. They were just completely offline. And so having cash in a variety of denominations is really, really smart. That's going to be a different for everyone. Everybody's on a different budget, but as much as you can, a few $100s minimum. The money just doesn't go that far these days. And so I always recommend packing the larger denominations in like a traveler's wallet that goes around your waist underneath of your clothing so that it's discreet, and storing the cash in multiple places on your person or in your bug out bag so that you're not pulling out a big wad of cash in the event that you would be around a lot of other evacuees. But
Yeah.
having cash on hand at home for, purchasing supplies in the event that there was a grid outage is really smart as well.
Got it. Uh, food. Do
Food.
you do
Yeah,
you
huge.
recommend any kind of amount of food or?
Yeah, huge category. So let's talk about just sheltering in place. What
Yeah.
what makes sense for someone who would like to feel confident in the food department should the food supply be interrupted? So the the strategy that makes the most sense for most people, okay, is what's called rotation. And it goes like this. It's really simple. So you identify the top 10 foods that you and your family eat the most often that have a 6 month or beyond shelf life. Okay. These are all inner aisle grocery store items: oatmeal, cereals, canned goods, pastas, boxed goods. Most of those items have a 6 month to 1 year shelf life at any given moment. Okay. So, and a lot of people can identify 10 of those items that they eat on a regular basis. Okay. So the strategy of rotation goes like this. You simply, when you go to the grocery store, you buy a couple of extra of some of those items each time, and you put those extras in a separate pantry, and you rotate through those extras as you need them. And you're always buying a few extra when you go to the grocery store. So you're building a back stock over the course of several weeks or several months of the top 10 items that have a long shelf life that you're eating anyway. And so over the course of a few weeks and months, you're going to build a pantry full of these long shelf life items that you're just consistently rotating through. So for most people, that solves a lot of problems in the food department. And it's really easy to build up a 2 or 3 week supply just using a system of rotation. Okay. But freeze dried food is an awesome option. I love freeze dried food because it stores for 25 plus years. It maintains 90+% of the nutritive value, and it tastes good, and it's really easy to eat. These are like the camping meals that you open up and add boiling water to. Okay. Can get vegetables and meat and entrees and casseroles. Anything that you can imagine can be freeze dried and is available. The only downside to freeze dried food is it's expensive. And so it's not an option for some people who might be on a tight budget. But rotation can work for anyone. Everybody's got a few extra dollars that they could buy a couple of more cans of tuna. Freeze dried food is more of a set it and forget it type food storage, but it's a really great and nutritious option and easy to prepare.
Got it. Um, so we got food, water, shelter, meds, cash.
Yeah.
What
So I call this category fire. Okay. Which
okay.
which just means staying warm, essentially, right? So in a bug out scenario, fire can keep you warm in cold weather conditions. It can also boil water, cook food, prepare freeze-dried meals that might be in your bug out bag. So your fire kit in a bug out bag needs to consist of, I always like to recommend a ferro rod, which is a metal match. You just simply strike a striker against a ferrocerium rod, and it produces sparks of burning metal that are thousands of degrees in temperature. They are a multi-season, multi-weather tool that works all the time, unlike a disposable Bic lighter, which won't work when it's wet and won't work when it's cold. So ferrocerium rod, you can buy them on Amazon for $10. And then the tinder can be made at home virtually free. It's just cotton balls soaked in Vaseline, petroleum jelly. One cotton ball soaked in, just combined and smashed with petroleum jelly, can burn up to 10 minutes. And it's an all weather, virtually free fire tinder that lasts forever. Okay. But at home, that's different, right? Maintaining heat at home when the electric's down, or when maybe the natural gas isn't working, or when your propane tank is running empty, that becomes a little more tricky. So you want to have a backup heat source at home. A really great option is our kerosene space heaters. These are, not a lot of people use kerosene space heaters anymore, but kerosene is a fuel that you can store that can last for 10, 15 plus years, unlike gasoline. And these kerosene space heaters can heat 200, 300, 400 square foot really easily. They are safe for indoor use as long as you kind of follow the rules and don't put them next to curtains and stuff like that. But my grandparents heated their entire house in Indiana weather with 2 or 3 kerosene space heaters. So not only can a kerosene space heater prevent you and your family from freezing, but they can prevent your pipes from bursting if you lose heat. It's shocking how dependent most households are on electricity for heat. And if you don't have a fireplace or a propane tank or a ventless natural gas backup heater, kerosene space heaters are going to be the most turnkey, affordable option. You can buy one for $150. You can grab various sizes of kerosene containers for storage, and you don't have, and it'll store for it's a very stable fuel that does not go bad. So that can check a box in the heat department really quickly.
Uh, Another category, toiletries. What do you recommend there?
Yeah, so we oftentimes see on the news, right? When natural disasters strike, people run for toilet paper, right? So that seems to be a hot commodity when disasters strike. I've never quite understood that, but I guess it makes sense. But you ideally just make a list of the things that you use on a regular basis, and make sure to have a few extras of those, toilet paper, things like hygiene items. What do you use for hygiene? For women, it may be feminine hygiene products. If you have an elderly person in your home, like I do, maybe it's adult diapers. Maybe if you got babies, you may need baby diapers. I mean, those things you run through those things really, really fast. And there aren't very good alternate substitutes for them when you run out of them. And so just kind of having a running list of what hygiene products do I use on a regular basis to keep myself clean and my house clean, and just have a lot of those things are long-term storage things anyway. They don't really have a shelf life. And so just keeping a few extra of those on hand can go a long way in the event that people would be wiping out the aisles of toilet paper.
Yeah. So in a bug out bag, something that's portable, some of the things we've talked about, I mean, kerosene heaters and you know, is it how important is it to have? I mean, I guess I would assume it's length of time that you're going to be in the situation that kind of dictates uh, the supply. I mean, the immediate, if it's a basic, you've got,
Yeah.
you don't know how long it's going to be. Something just happened. You've got to evacuate. Don't know where you're going, kind of thing. A few days maybe.
Yeah.
Um, is there kind of a hierarchy of things as time goes on, or is it just more of
Yeah.
the things,
It,
consumables?
it's a great question. So, with a bug out bag, we keep the time limit at 3 days, period, 72 hours. That's otherwise you kind of go down a rabbit hole that it's hard to stop. If you don't just create a hard out time limit on your bug out bag, you start putting things like, ammunition and snares and stuff like that for getting food.
Yeah.
It's just not very it's just not very practical, right? So you have to always balance, can I carry this thing? Because a lot of
Right.
times in bug out situations, there's, in a mass exodus scenario, which happens all the time, despite what people think, like mass exodus from those California wildfires, those highways were blocked. You weren't getting out unless you were walking. Okay. And so a lot of times you have to walk with this bug out bag. So that's a whole nother story. You got to be able to carry this bug out bag. So if anything over about 35 pounds is just unrealistic for most people. So 3 days on a bug out bag, a minimum of 2 weeks for preparing at home. So I always say start with 2 weeks, and you will tell yourself, you'll be able to identify within your own, everybody's different. Like, am I comfortable with 2 weeks? Some people aren't, some people aren't comfortable with a year, right? So everyone's different. Everyone's level of fear and anxiety is different. Everyone's disaster preparedness threats are different, right? There are safer areas than some areas that are just hit all the time on a regular basis. So everyone's comfort level is different, but a minimum of 2 weeks, and then it can just continue to go up from there based upon your comfort level. And the longer you prepare, the more creative you have to be with your storage, right? Because we are storing consumables in most cases. For someone who wants to go a really long time with food, they're definitely going to have to be tapping into that freeze-dried food category that lasts 25 years. But they may want to even think about, what are some renewable food sources that I could establish myself? Could I get backyard chickens for eggs? Could I plant a small garden? Could I learn wild edible foraging, right? Do I have room for a couple of cows, right? So we start thinking about, what did people do a long time ago before we had this food production network that exists today? So there is a threshold that we cross, where at some point we have to start thinking as a producer versus a storing all kinds of consumables, because there's a limit on what you can really do there, versus producing some of your own food and having renewable water sources like a well, or like a fireplace for heat, versus storing kerosene for backup fuel. And so those are decisions that you don't really have to think about, though, until you start really getting into months of preparedness.
Yeah. So taking this from like a personal standpoint to maybe more like thinking beyond your personal. I mean, survival, I think, is a very just it's a personal survival. I mean, you're talking, life. You got to sustain yourself.
Yeah.
If you were to extrapolate that and go to more like a business beyond. So now you've got the home, you figured out how to, make it through the night, make it through the next day. Do any of these that we've talked about, do they apply to a business, or is there like additional things you would expect one to consider when looking at a business?
That's an interesting question. And my answer is probably no. I don't think that, other than having very clear policies in place for evacuation or shelter in place scenarios at a business, in the immediate threat of a disaster, whether that's a tornado or a hurricane or a terrorist attack, there definitely need to be policies and clear directives for action in place should those events happen, whether it's evacuation or hunkering down for a certain period of time for business. But when it comes to storing supplies and having storage for food and water and things like that, no. But it is worth considering for people who do go to work, right? We start broaching topics like a get home bag, because most of my stuff is going to be at home, right? What if I'm at work and at a big city and a terrorist attack happens, for example, which has happened, right?
Yep.
And I can't take public transportation home. I have to walk home. Maybe I'm 25 miles away. How do I get home? How do I provide for myself as I'm getting home? So thinking about keeping supplies in your car. Should the roads be blocked or should there be a winter storm? So how do I get from work to home, and what do I need with me to make that journey? And so that's different for everyone. But things like, a mini version of a bug out bag that's just kept in your car or under your desk at work that helps you get home in the event of a situation, or keeping winter boots in your vehicle and an extra outfit to make a journey, and some fire starting supplies and a get home bag in your vehicle, right? So these are questions everyone should be asking themselves if they work out of the home, and that commute could one day be treacherous.
Got it. Got it. No, that good recommendation there to have that kind of the bag outside of the home in case you're not home,
Yeah.
or some sort of a sense of what if, I'm here kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, is there a kind of a one, two, three, or like a starting point, or is like an awareness element to this that you recommend people kind of recognize their surroundings and their environment? Is there a, I mean, we've talked about the elements of the bug out bag, but I'm just thinking of just as a process or a thinking hierarchy or paradigm that you encourage people to kind of go through when considering this.
Well, what's interesting is this is a topic in general that a lot of people are thinking about right now. I think that when we went through the pandemic during COVID, it brought the idea of preparedness to the surface in a level that I've never seen in my life. I had friends and family talking to me about the topic who actually kind of giggled about it before, right? And so it's a topic now that a lot of people are talking about and thinking about, first of all. So it's not a weird topic anymore. There was a time when maybe it felt like a little weird, like you talked about it in your basement.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean? It was like a
Yeah.
little club thing, but it's not a weird topic anymore. In fact, I would argue that, you're kind of weird if you're not thinking about it. Especially if you have a family.
Yeah.
The cycles of disaster these days are absolutely crazy, and the instability in our world, not only from a weather perspective, but from an economic and political perspective, are just mind-boggling. And if you're not thinking about this subject, you should be. But in terms of in the midst of a crisis, there's there are two thoughts I have. Number one is taking some of these preparedness steps in advance in times of peace can do so much for you mentally when a time of crisis happens. It can help to reduce fear and anxiety, having a plan already in place rather than trying to make these decisions in the midst of an unexpected and sudden disaster scenario is so much better on the human psyche, especially for children, than the alternative. Right. So just doing some of this stuff in advance goes a long way mentally to prepare one for disaster. But the second thought I have is just honing your situational awareness, right? Just becoming an independent thinker who is situationally aware of their surroundings. If you ever were to evacuate, it can be dangerous and chaotic. Unfortunately, disaster scenarios bring out the best in people, humanitarian aid, but it also brings out the worst in people. There are the vultures of our society that unfortunately come out and feed upon crisis, and that is individuals and their stuff and all of the things that surround the chaos. It is no argument that first responders and our faithful policemen and firemen and women, they are overwhelmed in the midst of chaos, and so your first responders become yourself and your neighbors.
Yeah. No, definitely, be self-reliant and have some sort of a plan will definitely take you a long ways. When everybody else is panicking, to have some sort of a sense of you're going to make it and a plan to make it. That's definitely good advice there.
And it's not going to be perfect. Your plan is
Yeah.
not going to be perfect. Every disaster is different. There is no perfect plan for an imperfect world. And so don't, for the OCD overthinkers out there, just, don't try to have a perfect plan that covers everything. It's impossible. You're never going to have one, but I can tell you that just a few strategies in place goes a really long way to moving the needle for preparedness. And it doesn't have to be overly expensive. I learned a long time ago that the harder something is and the more expensive it is, the least likely people are to do it. And so in my book, especially my most recent one, Disaster Survival 101, that's what the book is. It is easy to implement strategies that are inexpensive for the average person or beginner in preparedness. And I knew that if I collected all of these strategies in one place, and they were easy and they were affordable, that the chances of people actually doing them would go way up.
Oh, no, definitely well said. Yeah, you make it too complicated and too far out there. It's probably not as easy or likely to happen. So, well said.
Yeah. Like in my book, I'm not recommending to go move to the mountains and buy a solar farm.
Right.
Right. I'm not,
Right.
that's not in the book. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's much more simple executable strategies.
Got it. Got it. Hey, Creek, if we could, I'd like to shift gears here for a second. As I mentioned you before, by day I'm an insurance broker. And as such, I work with my clients to assess risk and determine what to do with the risk. And there's three strategies we typically consider. We first look to see if there's a way we can avoid the risk. When that's not an option, we look to see if there's a way we can minimize the risk. And if we cannot avoid nor minimize, we look to see if there's a way we can transfer the risk. And that's what an insurance policy is. It's a risk transfer vehicle. And as such, I like to ask my guests if they can look at their own situation. It could be the environment, political, clients, economic, whatever it is that you identify and consider to be the biggest risk. And again, for clarification, while I am an insurance broker, I'm not necessarily looking for an insurance-related answer. And so if you're willing, I'd like to ask you, Creek Stewart, what is the biggest risk?
That's a great question. And I think most people would probably expect me to say that it's being lost in the woods or being struck by a natural disaster. But I guess I'm going to get real personal on this one. Me personally, being a wilderness survival instructor and a preparedness consultant, I see all of the bad things and think about all of the bad things and think about all of the scenarios, right? And it's really easy for me to get caught up just too much in all of the things of this world. And so I think my biggest risk is thinking that they I don't know, giving them too much value versus the things that are eternal, right? The things that last forever. Our life and these little natural disasters that happen, even though I'm in this business and even though I sell books on the subjects, they're just little tiny blips in this lifetime of eternity. And so for me personally, it would be to consume myself with the thoughts of the temporary things versus the eternal things. And I'm going to quote scripture on you. I always think about this verse from Colossians, set your mind on the things above and not on the things of this earth. And so my strategy for navigating that is to take time each day and try to spend time in solitude and prayer and reading scripture and, try to dig in a little bit deeper to the eternal side of things so that I just don't focus so much on the negativity and the temporary.
Definitely some words of wisdom in today's world, and definitely something. I mean, it's easy to get caught up in the information of the moment and kind of the storm there. So I appreciate that.
No problem.
Hey, Creek, where can the listeners go if they'd like to learn more or connect with you?
Yeah. So creekstewart.com. That's my website. If you jump on my email list from there, I will give you for free my best-selling 3 pocket survival field guides. And if you Google Creek Stewart, just don't go past page 3, and we'll still be friends.
That's awesome. Well, Creek Stewart, I cannot say thanks enough for taking the time to talk today. I've enjoyed it, learned a lot, and look forward to doing it again soon.
Well, I really appreciate the opportunity, and best of luck to you, and be safe. And like I always say, it's not if, but when.
Got it. For our listeners, if you like this episode, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Remember, the more you know, the more you grow. That's all we've got this week. Until next time, thanks for listening to Commercial Real Estate Pro Network's CREPN Radio.
You're listening to CREPN Radio for influential commercial real estate professionals. For more information on this or any of our guests, like us on Facebook, CREPN Radio.